Well, welcome back, everybody. It's now 2 o'clock, and this issue-specific hearing is now resumed. And before we go on to the next item on the agenda, which is access and egress from Grove Farm, and I'm not aware of any housekeeping matters I need to deal with. There is having reflect on matters over lunch, and no doubt you will have too. There is just one, I think, clarification question that I would like to ask in respect of the last item that we dealt with on the non-vehicular traffic and community severance, and I'd like to ask Mr. Douglas if he's there and back. Mr. Douglas, on Friday we are going to discuss all things development consent order, and you'll note out that on the agenda we're going to talk about the Havering's Section 106 requirements. But I just wanted to know the item we were talking about, the cycle path and the proposed location and provision of it. Does that come under your sustainable travel agenda financial requirement you're seeking, or is that something different? And just before you answer that, could you keep the I don't want to stray too much into Friday, but I do want to just have almost a yes/no answer. Does the sustainable travel agenda that you're seeking cover this provision?
Thank you, sir. The sustainable travel agenda that we're seeking does not include that proposal that Highways England set out this morning. So it doesn't include the cycle route that they're looking to progress through designated funds.
Right. So that is some. So whether that's provided or not, you have your own requirements, which we'll discuss on Friday.
Yes, sir. That's correct.
Okay. Thank you very much. That's all I had. That's helpful. And I just wanted to also for the discussion on Friday, and this is aimed at the applicants. I'm not seeking a response now. We talked again just before about the cycle path. The examining authority is leaning towards the view that this ought to be secured in this DCO, particularly having regard to the national policy statement on securing improvements. And perhaps again for a discussion on Friday, you could give some thoughts to how that might be provided, whether it be via a travel plan or some other means. But perhaps we can. I'll leave that with you for us to return to on the Friday. So with that in mind, that's all the matters I had. So we'll move across to the next item on the agenda. Mr. MacArthur.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. So yes, moving on to access to and egress from Grove Farm. So a deadline to the owners of Grove Farm submitted via their representatives so proposed amendments to the applicant's proposals for access to and egress from the Grove Farm site. I will come on and ask the representatives of the owners of Grove Farm to go into a little bit more detail about those proposals, but in summary, it appears that the proposals suggest that the applicant close the existing access to Grove Farm from the M25 northbound onslip, that the applicant provide new dedicated auxiliary left turn lane access to Grove Farm from the M25 northbound onslip, and that the applicant provide a new dedicated auxiliary left turn lane access to Grove Farm from the A12 eastbound onslip to Junction 28. First of all, I will ask the Grove Farm representatives to correct me if I've misunderstood any of that, and then please briefly describe what they perceive as the benefits of their proposal, why they believe it's a good solution.
Thank you, sir. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. You're a bit stop-starts. Yeah.
Paul McLaughlin, representing Mr. and Mrs. Jones, owners of Grove Farm.
Thank you. Yeah, we can hear you. If you get too jumpy, we'll intervene and perhaps ask you to turn your camera off. But please proceed for now.
Okay. Okay. We've submitted representations to yourselves with respect to alterations to the access to Grove Farm from the M25 on slip and the A12 eastbound off slip. The first and most important alteration is to the existing access to the farm from the M25 slip. I won't go through I won't repeat in detail the full text of the benefits, but just to refer you to section
Mr. McLaughlin, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Of the alterations to the access.
Mr. McLaughlin, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you are breaking up quite a lot. So can we try with your camera off? And if you could just repeat the sort of last sentence that you just had.
Okay. Is this better?
I think so.
Oh, sorry about that. Yes.
That's okay.
I'm just referring to the submission we made, and I want to talk firstly about the proposals for the alteration to the access to Grove Farm from the M25 on slip. The benefits are discussed in section 213 of our submission, and I'll briefly go through them, if you may. Firstly, we would propose closing the existing access to the farm from the M25. I consider this would be an improvement to the access. Looking at Highways England's response to our submission, they do mention in a number of places that the proposal or the scheme does not affect Grove Farm access, but in my opinion it does affect the access, and you can clearly see on my drawing 3396110, you can clearly see the location of the existing A12 eastbound off slip, which I've coloured in yellow. And I've also on that drawing superimposed the new alignment for the A12 eastbound on slip. Looking at the yellow shaded alignment, if you were turning left on the proceed northbound on the M25, you have at least 40 metres of curb line once you depart from the A12 on your left before to the slip lane entry to the farm. With the realigned A12, that 40 metres is cut back to, it's difficult to say from the plans that have been published, to the maximum 10 metres, possibly down to 5 metres or 0 even. So the issue with safety there is that when you have left turning traffic from the A12 slip, turning left into the M25, there is inadequate time for left indicators of vehicles to switch off before you reach the current entrance to the farm. And so this, in my opinion, would cause a confusion whereby motorists behind would either still consider indicators of vehicles coming from the A12 still being on, confusing them with indicators for vehicles entering the farm. So this distance between the new alignment for the A12 and the existing entrance, in my opinion, is far too short and would consist of a safety issue. So the proposal is to move the existing access to the farm north, on the north side of the electric substation lay-by, provide a short admittedly it's substandard, but a short deceleration lane into the farm in a new location. This will be combined with the farm access, with the maintenance pond access already proposed by Highways England. It would actually replace that access. It would be an access only for the farm, and it would provide benefits to the pond maintenance area because it would pull the gates to that pond maintenance further away from the M25 slip into the site. The second issue would be the second proposal is the provision of a new to-grow farm from the A12 eastbound slip, the new alignment of the eastbound slip. The benefit of this is that it will avoid heavy goods vehicles requiring to enter the roundabout before entering the site from the M25, and it removes large vehicles, farm vehicles, vehicles accessing the existing uses on the site, allows them to slip off easily and, in my opinion, within standard, slip off the A12 slip again without impacting on Brook Street and the roundabout. Going back to one point, going back to the access off the M25, moving the existing access provides benefits to the dwellings in that the noise from traffic entering the site will be moved further north and therefore further away from the 3 dwellings which are on the on the site in that corner. And you can see from my drawing 3396110, I've notated where the 3 dwellings are. There's obviously the main farmhouse and accommodate to the north of the main farmhouse, which is a long rectangular building which contains 2 separate dwellings. So in our opinion, the proposals that we've made are proportionate and realistic, and certainly for the access to the M25 would remove what I consider as a safety hazard from the proposals as they stand.
Thank you, Mr. McLaughlin.
Thank you.
That's very very useful. Before I move on, what I intend to do is I will ask the other interested parties for their thoughts on the proposals as you've put forward, and then come to the applicant for their thoughts finally. But before I do that, excuse me, before I do that, can I just ask why it's believed necessary for there to be 2 points of access and exits from the site effectively within such close proximity?
The proposals will not add any additional exit from the site. The alterations to the entrance on the M25 will be an entrance only. So the exit at that point would be just for Highways England's maintenance vehicles. So there will be no connection from the from the site directly to the M25 northbound on slip.
So from the Grove Farm site? Yes.
So it looks as though there may be some possibility for a connection, but no, the intention is that from the M25 it would remain as an access only.
Noted. Thank you for that correction. And the reasoning behind setting aside exits or egress from the site, then why 2 access points in such close proximity would be a benefit?
I think the main benefit, as I say, would be to remove HGV turning movements or take them off completely. Any HGV turning movements arriving at the Grove Farm The benefit of this access would be to take those HG movements off the Brook Street roundabout, so they would come off before they come to the giveaway line at Brook Street.
Yeah. I see. Thank you very much. As promised, then I will ask the other interested parties. I'm particularly interested in excuse me, London Borough of Havering and Transport for London's views, but please, if anybody else has a view, to share it. Mr. Reinberg.
Yep, happy to respond first. Matthew Reinberg, Transport for London. So we have reviewed the proposals submitted by Grove Farm, submitted at deadline 2, and we don't plan to comment on the proposed amendments to access from the northbound M25 on slip, because that's not part of the Transport for London road network and is more for the applicant to do. Regarding the A12 eastbound off slip, so if TfL is to take responsibility for that off slip, then we would certainly have no issue with the current egress from Grove Farm being re-provided like for like, that's currently proposed as part of the applicant's design. If the egress was converted to also provide an access into Grove Farm with a left turn only lane provided, that would result in an increase in safety risks on the A12 eastbound off slip, naturally, because there's additional movements there. And we are also concerned that we believe that would form a departure from standards in the DMRB about the geometric design of grade separated junctions. So their direct accesses and priority junctions shall not be provided is what's in the standards. So it would be a departure, and it would be up to the designer of the scheme, Highways England, to determine whether such a departure is can be sought. And we did also note the concerns raised by the applicant about the potential for drivers to mistake access to Grove Farm with access to the northbound M25. So that is a risk. Whether there's appropriate measures that could be taken to reduce that risk, it may be possible. But overall, TfL Transport for London is broadly in agreement with the applicant's concerns about the increased road safety risk, but it would be really for the applicant to consider the overall road safety impacts, balancing any impacts on safety on the M25 northbound on slip against the A12 eastbound off slip. So in summary, we do have some concerns about the proposal, but we feel that the sort of overall approach needs to be balanced, or needs to be reviewed in road safety terms to come to a decision there.
Thank you, Mr. Reinberg. Mr. Douglas, do you have anything that you'd like to add from London Borough of Havering?
London Borough of Havering has nothing further to add other than what Mr. Reinberg has just mentioned with regards to concerns around the risk of drivers mistaking the access for entrance into Brook Street roundabout. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Douglas. So, Mr. Catesmark, I presume I should come to you for comments on behalf of the applicant for this.
I'd actually pass this question over to my colleague Simon Harris, if I may.
No problem at all. Thank you. We don't appear able to hear you, Mr. Harris.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, good news. Okay, my technology is a bit temperamental, shall we say. Okay, well, thanks for inviting me to comment. Simon Harris, I'm acting for Highways England today. I'm just going to go back to the first point raised by Grove Farm's representative earlier. As part of the scheme that we're proposing, there are no alterations to the carriageway adjacent to the existing ingress to Grove Farm off the M25, and consequently, no modifications have been proposed. The existing ingress is sited close to the exit from the roundabout, where vehicle speeds are slower. There is an acceptable safety record in this location with this current layout. There are no recorded accidents at the ingress. But relocating the ingress further north along the M25 on Slip Road will place it where highway vehicles are accelerating towards the merge with the M25. Our road safety and operational safety specialists have raised concerns that such a relocation will be unsafe. Vehicles braking to enter Grove Farm may cause collisions with vehicles accelerating towards the M25. They've also raised concerns that vehicles could exit Grove Farm via the ingress and turn right into the slip road, resulting in head-on collisions. That's a problem apparently elsewhere on the Highways England network, and they flagged that up for my attention. If I turn my attention to the egress now, this is the egress from Grove Farm onto the A12 eastbound carriageway. The existing egress will be affected by the realigned A12 slip road, and it is proposed to reconnect the egress to the realigned slip road on a similar alignment and distance from the stop line at the roundabout. So it's reflecting as close as possible the existing layout situation. The existing egress is located close to the stop line where vehicles are slowing down. And again, there are no recorded accidents at this location on the current layout. A new ingress from the A12 will introduce an additional movement. This will create further hazards for through traffic as vehicles brake for the diverge, where the slip road traffic is travelling faster, being further away from the stop line. This level of provision for private access could also be confused with the M25 on slip. And again, our road safety and operational safety specialists have raised concerns that such a provision would be unsafe. As picked up by Matthew Weinberg, direct accesses on slip roads are not permitted in the design standards. There will be departures from standards, and operational safety will be a material consideration in the departure approval review. That's all I wanted to say at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. Just coming back to one of your early points regarding moving the revised access from the M25 slip. You mentioned that it's in its proposed as position as proposed by the Redwood Partnership. It's less safe because vehicles are accelerating and will therefore be braking. But is it not the case that vehicles will be braking to come to the existing access in its current location?
The existing exit is quite close to the roundabout, so vehicles leaving the roundabout will be travelling slowly and travelling on into the access that's currently in place. So because it's closer to the roundabout, the vehicles following wouldn't yet be accelerating up onto the M25. But relocating this ingress access from that M25 road further to the north, by this time vehicles will be moving and increasing speed as they head north. Then vehicles will be leaving the M25 into the farm and braking and moving out of the way, but the vehicles behind will be looking to accelerate up to merge with the M25, and so there's a potential conflict being created there which doesn't exist currently.
So in your view, and in coming back to my layman's terms that I'm quite fond of, in the current scenario, the traffic which is using the existing access is effectively travelling at roundabout speed rather than coming up to motorway speed. And that's in
a nutshell. Yes, they're travelling more. They're leaving the roundabout and at a much slower speed because they're that close.
Okay, noted. Thank you very much. I will come back to Mr. McLaughlin just to ask if he has any points, and then I will come back to you again, Mr. Harris, in conclusion, if you don't mind.
Yes. Are you? Hello.
Please go ahead, Mr. McLaughlin.
Yes, sorry. Yes, you, sir, mentioned just now motorway speed. Well, in fact, the M25 on-slip, according to the Highways England response, has a design speed of 70 kilometres per hour, which is just over 40 miles an hour. So it hasn't got a speed limit for motorway speed. In its existing situation, the on-slip, the M25 on-slip, when you leave the roundabout, once you pass the substation, you're essentially slipping onto the M25 pretty close to the farm. In the proposals, the actual on-slip to the M25, it has moved 300 metres further north. So in fact, the section of road that passes the farm close to the roundabout is essentially a link road to the on-slip rather than the on-slip itself. So in brief, we're looking at a 40-mile-an-hour speed limit, not motorway speed limit, and the actual on-slip to the M25 is much further north than it is at the present time. So I don't see an issue with what I would consider a marginal relocation of the exit, and I think the idea that vehicles would be accelerating at motorway speed in this location is not correct, because that speed limit wouldn't apply to this section of road. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McLaughlin. I will speak on behalf of Mr. Harris briefly. That was my wording, not his. I don't think he suggested that, and I said approaching at motorway speed. But your point is well made and taken. Mr. Harris, do you have anything further to add?
Yes, I will come back. This is often a point of confusion, but we have a speed limit on the road and a design speed, and they're not actually the same thing. The design speeds are laid down in the standards, and these are the standards that we use to define radii of curvature, forward visibility, etc., for designing the road alignment. But the speed limit is something set down in the law somewhere. So as Mr. McLaughlin was saying, the design speed, get my facts, my name's right. Design speed for the slip road is 70 kilometers per hour, but the actual speed limit is 70 miles per hour. Now they are quite different figures, and I do appreciate that, but that is the fact. That is the fact across the country. Motorists, when they are leaving the roundabout and looking to join the motorway, are going to quite rightly assume that they can accelerate up to 70 miles an hour, and they were looking to do that as they do currently. So we mustn't mix up design speeds for design purposes and speed limits.
Okay, thank you. That's again useful information. I want to move on. I think we've heard enough from all sides to weigh up the arguments from both sides. So I don't propose that we stay on this subject for too much longer. I have got a couple of issues that I'd like to raise, more around the drawings used by the Redwood Partnership in particular. I would like to check. These are the only drawings that the examining authority has before them at this scale for this area. And they're really quite useful in terms of giving a level of detail over a particular area, and a particular area which is a cause for concern for not just for this topic, but other issues within the examination. First of all, are the drawings that they're using an accurate representation of what's been submitted as part of the application?
Well, our design isn't their design. What do you mean?
No, sorry. The drawings that they've used as a base. So obviously, your design is.
Oh right, yes. Yes, I recall that.
Go on.
Sorry, I was going to say we did provide. I believe we provided base drawings to to Mr. McLaughlin somehow to use for this purpose.
Can I assist in that one, sir?
Please,
Can
if you would.
Yes, we requested digital versions of the proposals on a survey base, ideally, but all we got from Highways England was the digital layout of the proposals, but they weren't located on an ordnance survey plan or a survey base. So the plan that you see in front of you, 3396110, that is my best interpretation of where the proposals, which are shown in brown, which I received from Highways England, how they fit on an ordnance survey plan. Clearly we don't have, we have asked, but we haven't received, we don't have a digital copy of the topographical survey or an accurate digital version of the proposals on an accurate base plan. So the brown alignment is the digital alignment received from Highways England, but where it sits on the ordnance survey plan is my best guess as to where it sits on the ground. But I agree. I think there's plans at this scale haven't been produced, and would be helpful in certainly getting a picture of how the new alignment sits relative to the farmhouse and to the dwellings compared to the existing alignment. I think it does give a fuller picture in how the proposals affect the farm. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McLaughlin. The examining authority agrees with you, and not solely for the purpose of this topic, but for other topics that we wish to discuss and get further information on around this area. We would like to ask the applicant to provide us drawings at this scale for this area, and wonder if that's something that could be provided to the examination.
I'll refer to Mark Chalice for comment there, if I may.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you, sir. Mark Chalice for Highways England. I need to take an instruction, but I think we are likely to be able to provide those. Would you just leave that with me, and I'll deal with that request?
Of course. How long do you need?
Not very long at all.
Okay.
I can probably sort something out by the end of the day.
We'll have space in the agenda for any other business, so perhaps you can come back to us then.
I will do. Thank you.
And then before we move on, I will go to my colleague, Mr. Allen, who also has a question.
Yes, thank you very much. I have one question for Mr. Harris and one for Mr. Chalice. If I start with Mr. Harris, please. My question to you is, I want to just take you back very quickly to the comments you made about the speed and accelerating up towards the M25. But the vehicles would have to slow anyway, would they not, to get to the highway, to take account of Highways England's construction vehicles? Because your access, your proposed access onto the site is just north of where the Jones family are proposing their new access, if you like. The cars would be having to slow down anyway, would they not?
Right. Well, the use of the access will be quite infrequent. It's going to be used by National Grid annually to inspect their pylons and access to the pond for checking the outfalls, etc. So it's infrequent use. And the access will be gained by trained maintenance personnel in liveried vehicles with flashing amber lights, who are trained to pull off motorways for this very sort of function. At that location, there'll be a hard shoulder. So the maintenance vehicle will be driving along the slip rail with its flashing lights on, indicating, and then pull off onto the hard shoulder before pulling in towards the gate to gain access to the maintenance track. There will not be an all-vehicle type access at this location. It's not meant to be attracting vehicles to use it. It's purely there for occasional use by maintenance vehicles.
Those vehicles, are they travelling in the opposite direction?
No, and this is slip road's one way. It's all from south to north.
So the hard shoulder that you talked about, that where these vehicles on, would that also include the proposed access area that is being advanced by the Jones family?
I believe that the deceleration lane that's being mentioned would sit in the same location as the hard shoulder.
So would it be fair to say then that the that should the examining authority want to or think this is a good idea, that vehicles approaching, let's call it the proposed Grove Farm access, the new one, would be on that same slow down lane that the vehicles using the access road would also use? Is that fair? They would be off the slip road, wouldn't they? They would be on this same slow down lane.
Our access is slightly further north than what's being proposed, as I recall, so they can pull off and slow down in that hard shoulder just north of the substation. But again, I must stress that the vehicles undertaking that maintenance stop will be travelling with their flashing lights on and making it very clear to follow it from the roundabout, keeping a lower speed from the roundabout to make it clear what their intention is, and indicating only once they're past existing Grove Farm current ingress, so there's no confusion to following motorists.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harris. My final question to Mr. Chalice. If the examining authority was minded to accept this drawing as the required solution, or we wanted to advance this to the Secretary of State as that it should be provided, how would we secure that in this DCO? I mean, just to be clear, we're not saying we will, but if we were minded to say actually this should be provided, what would be our options?
Well, I suppose so. As a matter of process, we would have to consider whether a change request is needed to deal with it and what the landowning implications would be. But I'm bound to say, sir, to echo what Mr. Harris said, that Highways England is opposed to doing this on safety grounds, and I think we would be therefore very loath to make any form of change request to promote a scheme which we considered unsafe.
I understood. I'm, as I said, I'm not suggesting that is what we will ultimately come to, but I need to look at the options that are available. Is another option again, Mr. Chalice, an additional requirement in the DCO, seeking some form of agreement on access prior to commencement? Is that another option, even if you might not agree that that's necessary or right?
I understand. I'm not sure it is so, because I think it does mean changing the works as described in the order, and I suspect that it would involve having to go through the change request process. I don't think a requirement can deal with it, because one can't, as it were, change the works by virtue of a requirement. So it doesn't sound to me, sir, that is a viable option.
I see. Okay, that's thank you, Mr. Chalice. I understand we've got we have a hand up, Mr. Bedson.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Just a quick point, and I'm sort of sticking my neck out a little bit, but I think you would find here that the owners of Grove Farm would happily make some more land available to accommodate the proposals, albeit that they are outside of the current DCO. I think a negotiation by agreement would facilitate that. And I think the main point of Mr. McLaughlin's report is that his proposals are certainly no less safe than those proposed by Highways England. So I don't think Mr. McLaughlin's proposals are any less safe at all. So, we would like them to be given proper and full consideration. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. McLaughlin?
Yes, I concur with that. In particular, the access from the M25, there is a safety issue with the realignment of the A12 eastbound being much closer to the existing access than it is at the moment. I think that does introduce a safety issue. I don't believe speeds will be high in the immediate stretch of carriageway on the M25 that we're talking about. And overall, I think this would be a safer access in both locations for Grove Farm.
Thank you. Yes, I was going to, Mr. Harris, I'm going to come back to you for the final word on this before I'll hand back to Mr. MacArthur.
Do you want me now? Sorry, yes, I wasn't.
Yes,
I beg your pardon.
I've asked my question. I've got the answers, but I'm giving you the
Thank you.
final word if you want it.
Okay, yeah, I just want to make it absolutely clear that we do not agree that the proposal by Mr. McLaughlin and team is no less safe than the maintenance access that we're proposing in our scheme. We're looking at quite different usage here. There's a big difference in terms of the numbers of traffic exiting Grove Farm to those exiting the maintenance track, and we're not comparing like for like.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. All understood. Mr. MacArthur.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. Thank you, Mr. Harris. We will then move on from transport matters onto the historic environment.
Well, just before you do, Mr. MacArthur, I just wondered whether you should ask whether anybody's got any traffic matters they want to raise before we move on. There may be one of our parties that wants to raise a traffic issue more generally.
By all means, Jane Allen.
Yes. Did you guess? This is all new to me, what you're talking about here, and I'm not massively okay, but the business about another entrance off of the A12 onto the farm, we've got Woodstock Avenue, the petrol station, Maylands Golf. We're going to have potentially another Grove Farm entrance, the slip road, and then I believe obviously the rest of the changes going on. It just worries me a little bit. It's another potential hotspot at the bottom of our road, really. But it may not be an issue. I don't know the volumes and things like that, but it's just another, say, potential hotspot. The cars and lorries are trying to get over to the left. This is dual carriageway, to get off into the farm. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. That's duly noted. Your concerns are noted, and we will bear them in mind as we go through the examination. Please, no, thank you. I'll keep asking people to put their hands down just as they put their hands down. If there are no other issues around the topic of traffic and transport, we will then move on. Just looking for hands, and we will move on to the historic environment. The first subject on the agenda under this topic is the baseline data and assessment of Tyler's Hall Farm. In their local impact reports, the London Borough of Havering raised issues around the available evidence in the environmental statement to support the applicant's view that heritage assets at Tyler's Hall Farm and the Grove would suffer no significant adverse effects. In their response at deadline 3A, the applicant has set out locations within the environmental statement that they believe contain this evidence. Can I ask the London Borough of Havering to confirm whether they are now satisfied that the applicant's response provides the evidence that they seek?
Thank you, sir. Yes, since London Borough of Havering submitted its local impact report at deadline 1, we've had further discussions with the applicant on both the two listed buildings at Tyler's Hall Farm and also the historic farm at the Grove, and we're now satisfied with the applicant in terms of the information that it's provided on both those matters. We've agreed wording on both matters in the statement of common ground, and I understand the iteration on the statement of common ground with that agreed wording will be submitted by the applicant at deadline 4. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Douglas. That's excellent news. Are there any other comments on this agenda item before I will just come to the applicant just for the final word, just if they have anything further to add. It sounds
thank
like
you,
it's
sir.
been covered.
Yeah, Mark Challis for Highways England, just to confirm that that is my understanding, and what has just been said will indeed be reflected in the statement of common ground we propose to submit at the next deadline.
Thank you very much, Mr. Challis. In that case, I will pass back over to my colleague, Mr. Allen, who will deal with the next agenda item.
Thank you. I thought we were going to be slightly longer on that, but that's fine. It's all good news. So the next item I want to talk about is the archaeological management plan that came in at deadline 3A. I don't have much to say on this other than to firstly ask the London Borough of Havering. I know Essex County Council are not here, but to ask London Borough of Havering if they've managed to look at the document and whether they have any views on it at this stage. And then I just have a few questions of my own to finish off. So if I could ask Mr. Single, if you have any views you want to make on it? Mr. Single, I think you have frozen. Right. Yes, I think you're going to have to log out and log back in, or so I am going to move on. I'm guessing it's not me that's frozen. Can everybody still hear me?
We can still hear you.
Yes, I
yes.
can hear
Right.
you. Yeah.
Okay, so it is Mr. Single, not me. Okay, fine. All right. What I want to, if I just wait for, I'll come back to the London of Havering, but I wanted to ask, obviously this document has come in as a result of questions that we asked and concerns that this document needed to come in. The applicants duly provided it. I have read it, and I think it has dealt with a lot of the questions I had. However, I want to be certain that pre-commencement works are adequately secured. So if I could ask the applicant, please. The document, the archaeological management plan does deal with pre-commencement works, but they're not secured in the DCO, and so I was wondering. This might deal with this matter very quickly. Does requirement 9 require amending, to make sure that that no development takes place prior to commencement or pre-commencement until the archaeological management plan has been approved?
I'm sorry, everyone. I'm Adam Single from Historic England, representing London Borough of Havering. I crashed out there for a moment.
Mr. Single, I have because you froze. I've sort of moved on, and I will come back to you. So, do you want to just hang on for a few moments, and I'll just deal with these other matters, and I'll come back to your view on it. So, thank you, Mr. Is it Mr. Challis or someone from the applicant to answer my question, please?
Yes, just to reiterate, your question is, should the revised requirement 9 also pick up pre-commencement works as dealt with in the archaeological management plan in outline version? Is that, have I understood your question correctly?
You have indeed, yes.
Okay, sir. Well, it's difficult because what we have tried to achieve with our definition of commencement is that relatively minor works which don't or are not likely to have significant environmental effects, Highways England should be able to press on with without having to go through the approval process set out in the requirements, and you will have seen, sir, that we've adjusted that definition in the latest version of the development consent order, and that is where we would like to get to. So if our outline plan does cover pre-commencement works, then I think so it probably ought to be adjusted to make it clear that they should be outside the scope of the Secretary of State's approval process. So if there is a mismatch there, I think we would like to take the opportunity to try and correct that.
Yes, that's going the other way from where I want to go, Mr. Chalice, because my concern is this, is that how are pre-commencement works controlled if the contractor comes across archaeological remains? There is no control process on what the contractor or the applicant needs to do, and this document will essentially come after those pre-commencement works have taken place and could fundamentally alter its content. So my putting it back your way, like Novak Djokovic would, I'm going to ask you again, please, to consider how pre-commencement works, how trial trenching and discovery of potential archaeological remains is to be controlled.
Well, sir, to return your volley, as it were, what we've now put in our definition of commencement is archaeological surveys and evaluations, and these are intended to be minor works, if I can put it that way, that are not likely to have significant effects, and therefore, so we're not suggesting that they do need to be controlled by virtue of the approval process set out in the requirements. So we are hoping to separate out those minor front-end works, if I can put it that way, because there's no need as a matter of process for them to go through the approval process. And as I say, if our outline plan doesn't clarify that well enough, then so I think it should.
Thank you. And just going on to the archaeological management plan itself and sections 3.1 to 3.3 of the report, it states there that the archaeological contractor is going to be responsible for including a summary in the final AMS of known archaeological backgrounds, potential for as yet unknown archaeology, and the research themes considered appropriate to guide the archaeological investigations. Are you content that that is secured in requirement 9? Is that going to happen?
Well, so definition of commence, to return to it, is surveys and evaluations. In other words, the front end minor works. Whereas I think what you are referring to is later on in the process. But may I, sir, defer to Kay Neustadt, who is the expert on that and the author of the plan, and she can no doubt give you perhaps a better answer than I can.
Thank you. Ms. Neustadt, your microphone is off.
Of course it is. Kay Neustadt, representing Highways England. The archaeological management plan in outline form, as it is now, is designed to act as a overarching written scheme of investigation that would address the identification, evaluation for significance, and the mitigation of impacts to archaeological remains as a result of the scheme. It is designed to deal with both the pre-commencement and the post-commencement works in terms of setting up a framework by which the task-specific written schemes of investigation for things like trial trenching, evaluation trenching, any area excavations, modeling, etc., would be done to aid in the assessment of the archaeological remains. The overarching written scheme of investigation part of the archaeological management plan would be developed through consultation with the Greater London Archaeological Advisory Service, Historic England, as represented here by Mr. Single, as well as if necessary, the conservation officer, though I don't believe we have any built heritage impacts at the moment, or anticipate any. The works are controlled through the development and implementation of these task-specific written schemes of investigation, which are required in advance of any archaeological field work, which would then be required in advance of any development work, including the pre-commencement works, if that makes sense.
Yes.
I still struggle a bit with the definition of commencement.
Yes, you might not be the only one, but if I could ask, I've got two questions for you, please, and then I'll ask Mr. Single to come in at that point. If I could just take you to paragraph 6.2 of the document, which states that geophysical surveys is not anticipated to be suitable for most of the scheme due to geology and vegetation cover. Are you able to expand on that a little bit? What could you allow? Why not?
I can expand on that a little bit, and Mr. Single may be able to present additional information on that. The geophysical survey that is most commonly done is magnetometry, which is best suited for certain types of archaeology and is not always visible, does not actually show all archaeology in certain soil types because of the different magnetic responses of the soils. The vegetation cover is a little bit easier to address in terms of the fact that you need a fairly clear field in order to do this type of geophysics reliably, which includes things like being able to walk or drive clear transects with like a small four-wheel drive with a kit mounted on the back of it, so that the heavily overgrown brambles and various scrub vegetation would need to be completely removed in order to make that a feasible option. In addition, the presence of things like services and farm equipment, any magnetic interference from either field manuring or underground disturbances, cabling, and such, will come up as masking possible archaeology features. And we understand the area to be quite heavily disrupted by various service lines and such, making the potential for geophysical surveys to be of use in any substantial way to be relatively limited.
Okay, thank you. I shall give some thought to that answer. It's also suggested that construction integrated recording would take place after trial trenching, the trial trenching evaluation. Should this not take place as a separate later phase in areas between known sites, which have already been investigated in more detail, and on anything unexpected that may come to light during the construction phase?
The outline archaeological management plan identifies the approaches with regards to trial trenching, which is, of course, an evaluation technique to identify and assess any subsurface remains that are encountered. Following the evaluation trenching, the next task in the process would be identified based on that information, whether that is area excavation that's done to mitigate and record the archaeology that is in the ground, or construction integrated recording, frequently called strip map and sample or strip map and record, during the remaining construction activities, would be something that would have to be identified in an iterative process based on the evaluation trenching, which is one of the reasons the outline archaeological management plan sets itself up as an overarching written scheme of investigation that would then allow the development of task-specific ones that can be dealt with that can be developed to deal with very specific impacts and the types of archaeology that might be identified.
So would it be
so the construction integrated recording could be considered to be appropriate.
I think we may have crossed each other there. So are you saying that it would be a separate phase to the trial trenching evaluation? It's not done immediately after the.
It would be a separate phase. The construction integrated recording would be a separate phase from the evaluation trenching. It would happen by definition as during the construction soil stripping as part of the commencement works. The evaluation trenching would inform the need and locations to do that. And a separate task-specific written scheme of investigation for the construction integrated recording would be required.
Thank you. And then if I could ask you to look at section 6.3 of the document, which states that trench plans would be used to identify sites. Are you able now, or if not, will the document set out with a final document when it comes in actually set out how many or how much of the site evaluating trenching it would cover, as well as the geophysical surveying, and when would this occur in the pre-commencement stage?
It's anticipated that the final archaeological management plan itself would specify the extent of trial trenching evaluations, say the percentage of coverage, which would be developed in consultation with the Greater London Archaeological Advisory Service and with the archaeological contractor working for the principal construction contractor. It would then also be subject to a separate task-specific written scheme of investigation identifying the locations of those trenches and things like the extent of the depth, what they're designed to test or not, or if they're random trenching patterns. And that would be developed by the archaeological consultant during the detailed design in advance of possibly during the examination period, but in advance of the commencement of the construction activities. And it would be designed by the archaeological contractor for the work, who's generally best suited to identify the very specifics that would be required for the trenching.
So is this archaeological management plan due to come in before or after the detailed design has been done?
I believe it is due to be developed in the overlapping with it. The archaeological contractor is on board with the team that is doing the detailed design and is working with us to develop and then finalize that.
Because yes, I mean, to my mind, surely the archaeological management plan must come after, or because how will you know which areas to survey if once you know the detailed design?
Well, the areas for survey can be identified at relatively early stages in the detailed design, because the archaeological investigations do cover more than just the exact specific areas of ground disturbance. So the trenching would have to be located kind of across the site, across the DCO boundary site, in order to address the full potential. Because while there are some areas that might have more potential than others to result in archaeological remains, the overall the site as a whole still needs to be examined as such. So it can be done at the same time as the design is developing. In addition, while the detailed design is being developed, any archaeological evaluations being conducted can then help aid in informing the detailed design.
Right, understood. Thank you very much indeed. Mr. Single, you've been quite patient. I'll return. You've heard the answers given to my questions, but the question I put to you, was your view on the outline archaeological management plan that's been submitted into the examination. Your view on that and the responses that I've received from Mr. Nostad.
Thank you very much, sir. I am concerned at both the content and the theoretical approach of the archaeological management plan. The archaeological management plan is not informed by field work. It does not show why the proposed approach has been adopted in favour of other management techniques, and it currently omits any undertakings on public benefit that might be factored into a balanced decision. Mr. Chalice earlier described archaeology as a minor environmental matter. Highways England's position on this as a minor environmental matter is based on their assessment thus far, which largely comprises a 4-year-old archaeological desk-based assessment, and which omits the key discovery in 2018 at the Gardens of Peace site immediately to the south of the application scheme of a Saxon occupation or activity site. Gardens of Peace is separated from the scheme by the A12, of course, and the A12 in this location follows the line of the Roman road from London to Colchester. And at this particular location, it's also where the Roman road crosses over the River Ingrebourne. At the northern end of the Gardens of Peace site, close to the main road, was found an early to middle Saxon site dating AD 450 to 650. Although the insertion of a major gas main along the northern edge of the Gardens of Peace had damaged it historically, visible features still indicated possible structures. And interestingly, the work also recovered a small sample of earlier Roman pottery from the Saxon features. So in East London, Roman and Saxon later settlement sites are often located at Roman river crossings. So you've got Romford, you've got Stratford, you've got Old Ford in Tower Hamlets. And there's a testable hypothesis here that there's a possible Saxon and possibly even earlier Roman settlement site straddling the old Roman road at this location, which extends north onto the north side of the A12 into the application site. Now, in terms of significance, Historic England's scheduling selection criteria, which are the secondary guidance that we follow when establishing whether or not national importance is going to be a criterion in making a decision, advise that all early Saxon settlements are candidates for scheduling. They're all potentially nationally important archaeological sites. And it also strongly implies that sites that transition from Roman to Saxon periods are even more important, because you can then start to look for evidence of continuity, evidence of change, the old sort of historical tale of the rampaging Germanics getting off their boats on the Essex coast and driving the Romano-British off into Wales and the West Country and the North Country is increasingly seen as a much more complicated picture of integration and interrelationships. So thinking about the policy here, the MPSNN has a particular paragraph about undesignated archaeological heritage assets that are of demonstrable significance to scheduled monuments, and it says that they should be treated as though they are designated assets when in decision making, so that harm from them from a consented scheme really does have to be exceptional. And it's my advice that the applicants have not assessed this potential or any other archaeological potential at the site using the appropriate methods that can inform a decision. And that we seem to have jumped ahead logically to a belief that a consent on the current design will be granted, which will leave very little flexibility for design changes to preserve any very important archaeological remains, without going through the assessment and field evaluation process that the MPSNN enshrines.
Thank you, Mr. Single. Quite alarming to hear that. Was that picked up largely in the local impact report?
That is included in the local impact report, so yes, along with the Roman road, the archaeological priority area around the river confluence.
Thank you. And could you, so as you got the applicant here, what would you be expecting the archaeological management plan to include? If you could perhaps advise the examining authority while the applicant's listening, what should we be asking the applicant now to have another go at this archaeological management plan?
As per my advice in August when the application was lodged, what I would like the archaeological management plan to be informed by is the results first of some geoarchaeological modelling of the site based on the GI work that's already taken place to try and identify areas of modern disturbance, areas of higher archaeological potential, and then for dedicated archaeological trenches targeting probably mostly the southern edge of the site, because that's where the key archaeology that's the evidence for the key archaeology is likely to be, for that work to inform a management plan, to inform the design, especially of ancillary features such as the service road and so forth, perhaps not the great big sweep of the cloverleaf itself. I appreciate that might be a harder thing to redesign, but so that if there are key remains along the south of the site, we can identify them, we can preserve them, and we can try to create some sort of public benefit as part of the scheme. I see that there's a cycle lane now being produced. It would be great if we could have some public interpretation of the heritage of the site along that cycle lane, for example.
Is this something that the Secretary of State could grant consent for, and this work be done before the production of the final AMS, or are you suggesting that this work needs to be done during the life of this examination?
I would suggest that a positive decision based on the current amount of archaeological information would not be a policy compliant decision.
Sorry, can I just pause? I'll just make a note of that. So is it your advice, I'm going to push you here, Mr. Single, is your advice currently that if the applicant was to disagree and say, no, this is perfectly fine, on your opinion, should the examining authority be recommending refusal of this scheme based on the archaeological information before it?
The risk here is that nationally important remains could be found in parts of the site, and that their preservation could not be secured, and harm to undesignated archaeological assets of demonstrable significance to a scheduled archaeological monument, harm to them should be wholly exceptional.
Mr. Single, thank you very much. So I'm going to return to I've got a hand up. I can see is that Mr. Neustadt, I was going to come back to you anyway, but do you want to? Yes, I'll come to you unless Mr. Chalice wants to come in as well, but I'll come to you in the instance for a response.
Yes, I don't know, Mark, if Mr. Chalice, if you had anything on it, but I will say that what Mr. Single has said about the baseline for the archaeology is slightly misleading, as we have actually taken into consideration more than just the information that was done for the dust-based assessment that was produced initially at the preliminary environmental impact report stage, that it does include updated information from the historic environment record at the time of the environmental statement, and has incorporated the discoveries that at the Oak Farm Cemetery, the Saxon site that Mr. Single referred to, as much as we possibly can. It should be noted that I only received the information that confirmed the dating on the pottery from that site about 2 weeks ago, and that the previous reports, it was not on the historic environment record data that we requested, either for the dust-based assessment because it hadn't been discovered as yet, or for the environmental statement, though in consultation with GLASS for the archaeological watching brief that was done for the ground investigation work, we did discuss the finds that had been made at Oak Farm Cemetery and their possible significance. I've just, as I said, recently seen the post-excavation analysis that Adam kindly sent through to me a couple weeks ago on the excavations for that site at Oak Farm, which were recorded through excavation at the sites, and process and development was not stopped, nor do I believe any preservation in situ was identified as appropriate for that location. Our assessment of the archaeological potential of the area based on the known historic environment record, the archaeological priority areas and priority zones, which include the Roman road and some geological deposits that are thought to possibly relate to early prehistoric settlements or early prehistoric deposits. We have consulted those and believe that while there may be nationally significant archaeological remains, that the likelihood of this is relatively low, as there's been little information to suggest from the previous investigations done for everything from various gas pipelines, the Oak Farm Cemetery, the M25, anything reported from the Portable Antiquities Scheme, to suggest that there's any intensive Roman settlement at this location. And if there is early medieval or Saxon remains there, that while they may need to be considered in terms of their schedulable quality, once identified, we have not identified any, we've not uncovered anything that has yet to identify them within our project area. In part, this is, yes, because we've not been able to do the evaluation trenching, which under ideal circumstances would have been done in advance of the DCO design. There were other issues that related to how that was able to be undertaken or not, as the case may be, including land access. But the NPSNN specifies that the baseline be the evidence be baselined on the historic environment record, additional information from such things as consultation, the ground investigation monitoring from the archaeological watching brief, which did develop a depositional model and has been submitted to GLASS by ourselves as well as the company that produced it. That we feel we've been compliant with it, with the NPSN, and due to the fact that we've considered all of the sources that are noted in that document in the NPSNN as required to aid in the decision. And whereas it does note that field investigations should be taken into consideration if required, it also implies that they're not always required, and also there are other issues regarding the field investigations, the evaluation trenching, that may have prohibited it from happening again with such things as land access. The evaluation trenchings to identify and assess the significance of any as yet unknown archaeological remains, we feel can be done during the examination period and in the pre-commencement periods in order to meet the requirements to consider the historic environment by the NPSNN, as well as being required through the Register of Environmental Actions and Commitments and Requirement 9 of the DCO, following those documents that were outlined in the management plan. The main point that we have regarding the potential for the nationally significant archaeological remains and the potential for Roman or Saxon remains is that the regulations in the NPSNN do specify that they should be treated as scheduled remains if they are of that quality. We do not currently have any information that suggests such remains are likely or would be there. Obviously, absence of evidence is evidence of absence. But
I'm going to interrupt it, but that viewpoint you acknowledge has been reached on a desktop survey as opposed to actual trial trenching or detailed archaeological testing.
Correct.
Okay, and you also acknowledge that you say that the NPSN requires you to take along the baseline from the environmental record, but you acknowledge that that may have been out of date because he didn't take into account the fines on what is now the Gardens of Peace land.
Our environmental statement and the further archaeological watching brief for the ground investigations did take into account the fines at the cemetery that were identified. The reason, and that reason is because we were able to consult with Glass and get the information from them regarding the most up-to-date information coming out of those excavations. Obviously, the nature of archaeology is we don't know what we know until we find it. And therefore, it would not be possible to really predict that there would be a nationally significant Anglo-Saxon site south of there prior to it actually being recovered. And in the first instance, in the trial trenching for that specific site, it was actually identified as a Mesolithic, or not a Mesolithic, an Iron Age, I believe, an Iron Age selection of pottery. It wasn't until it was excavated, removed from the site, sent for carbon-14 dating, that it was identified as Anglo-Saxon. So in that case, it may be an issue of whether or not preservation in situ was appropriate for that site, but it wouldn't have been identified as an Anglo-Saxon site until quite some time after it was first identified and had already been excavated.
Okay. Mr. Single, do you want to respond to what you've heard? And I do mean respond rather than repeat what you've previously said. Is there anything that Ms. Nostad has said that you want to come back on?
Well, to be brief, it's I mean, it's not an unusual, I think, a concept in environmental management generally, that one needs to understand what one is dealing with before one comes up with a management plan for it. I've been involved intermittently in the project for some years now, and Ms. Neustadt and I have discussed field evaluation. Unfortunately, Highways England have taken the decision not to progress that, and I had been hopeful in recent months that we would get some access to the site and that trenching could take place, but we now find ourselves in a position where I'm concerned that a management plan has been put together that itself is a very bare bones approach. I'm concerned that construction integrated recording is specifically defined as not being something that could possibly affect the timetable for the development, which, when you find important archaeology, it starts to set alarm bells ringing. As I say, the absence of public benefit as well in the scheme, I would really like Highways England to take this back and revise their approach extensively.
And if they were to, are you suggesting that if they were to go and do further modelling and further testing, could that be achieved within the timescale of the examination? Or is this years of work ahead of them?
I would say, I mean, they would have to negotiate access with the landowners, which I understand is something that they would have to ensure they could do. But a targeted trial trenching program would take a few weeks. Reporting on that a few weeks more, and I think it would provide the necessary level of comfort if there are no remains of potential national significance there, for me to be able to support the scheme with some updates to the archaeological management plan, which I think could be done within the examination period timeframe.
Thank you, Mr. Single. Ms. Neustadt, is that something that you're prepared to do?
We are currently working with Highways England is currently working with the detailed design team and with Atkins to prepare any documents. I believe, and Mr. Chalice may be able to speak more on behalf of land access, as I'm not dealing directly with that. There is an archaeological contractor on board with the detailed design team that should be able to progress with the evaluation trenching. That, however, is something that would need to be instructed to them, I believe. Alternatively, it could be instructed to the DCO team. And again, I would have to defer to Mr. Chalice and to the Highways England procurements and such team to arrange exactly how that would happen. The timescales, as it were, do not suggest that it is not possible. The timescales in question, should access be allowed and arranged, is certainly doable.
Thank you. Mr. Chalice, I won't put you on the spot. Is this something that you could perhaps provide an update tomorrow morning when we resume the hearing, before we move on to landscape design? Was this something that perhaps you could come back to us on?
Yes, thank you for not putting me on the spot, because it is quite difficult to just give you an instant answer. As you will appreciate, it's not necessarily just a question of doing the work, but then producing the documents as a result of that work and getting any land access that might be needed. But so I think it would be helpful for you to be aware that I believe there is a meeting arranged on the 10th of March between Highways England and Glass, at which I hope that we could make some more progress and put Mr. Single's mind at rest. Beyond that, so do you mind if I come back to you as to the practicability of doing any more field work?
Yes.
During
Well,
the course
I'll
of this
ask
examination.
I'll ask you again in the morning then, just in case you have an update, and if you don't, you have, I mean, deadline for of the 17th of March, of course, post dates your meeting on the 10th. So you always have that deadline, certainly, to update us of what you intend to do in respect to this. Okay. Is there any other points anybody wants to make on archaeological matters?
Yes, sir, if I may, whilst I'm still on camera, Mr. Single, I think, said that I said that we, or I, said the archaeological works were minor works. I don't think I said or implied that. What I was talking about were those elements of the archaeological works that we seek to exclude from the definition of commence, and not indeed the entirety of the works covered by the plan. So just so there's no misunderstanding on that.
Mr. Single, your hand is up.
Yeah, thank you very much for clarifying that, Mr. Chalice. I apologise. I didn't mean to cause any offence there. Just to also say, I agree with Ms. Neustadt on the geophysical prospection issue. The geology in Havering is indeed extremely unwilling to give up its secrets. There is one particular kind of rig called a cesium vapor magnetometer, which has had results out that way, but it needs to be done in combination with another technique such as earth resistivity. And even then, I don't think in a site like this with a lot of alluvium, a lot of made ground involved, it's going to be particularly useful compared to trial trenching, which I think is really the way to go here.
Thank you. Well, I'll just conclude then on this matter to say that was a little bit of an eye-opener. I of course knew there was some concerns, but I've been slightly taken aback, say to say the least, on this issue, and the fact that we've heard from that Mr. Single has said what he said. So I think I shall certainly be, and I know the Mr. MacArthur as well will certainly be looking for some progress with this and some resolution. I'll be looking to the applicant certainly to do any target trenching that they're able to do and update the AMS accordingly. And I'll look forward to an update tomorrow, and if not at tomorrow, certainly at deadline 4 following your meeting. Okay, that brings us almost to the end for today, today's meeting. So just before I look to adjourn that.
Mr. Allen.
I'm sorry?
Mr. Chalice.
Didn't see your hand, sorry.
Thank you, sir. I just wanted to put my hand up before you close things, as it were. This is just on a process point, if I can raise this matter with you regarding the change requests, and particularly your letter of the 26th of February, for which thanks. And you have accepted 2 of the changes, and as regards the other 2, you're asking for the views of those involved by the 17th of March, and of course we understand that. So in the same letter you've asked if by the 17th of March we would update the DCO land plans and other documents. And what I would like to suggest to you, so is that is quite an undertaking, and of course we can do that, but then if you were to accept one or both of the other changes, and we hope you will accept them both, then I think we'll be putting in yet another set of plans, because those you've asked for by the 17th will be out of date. And I suggest that's a bit of a recipe for confusion, and it might be better if we wait until you and Mr. MacArthur have come to your decision on the change requests as a whole, and then put in a set of amended documents. It's also relevant to that issue, this issue that, of course, changes 1 and 2 are linked, and you have accepted change 1, but not yet change 2, pending comments. So that's my suggestion, so that we put in a set of amended documents when you've made your decision on all 4 changes. But if you do want an updated set of plans by deadline 4 for just those you've accepted, we can do that. But as I say, so I think that could get rather a lot of plans involved, and probably unnecessarily.
I will talk to Mr. MacArthur on that during the adjournment break. I will come back to you on that tomorrow, but my initial thought is I think that's sensible, that your suggestion, but I will just chat with my colleague in case he's vehemently against that and persuades me that that shouldn't happen. But I will certainly, perhaps during the resumption tomorrow, and before we move on to item 4, I will come back to you on that one.
Thank you. So I've got one more point, if I may. I promised to come back to Mr. MacArthur about the provision of plans, and I'm not able to, because I've obviously been listening to the discussion, and it does seem to be a bit more complex than it first appeared. So would you bear with me on that, and I shall give you a response as soon as I can.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, I think tomorrow morning, before we get into the hearing, might be a good opportunity to update us again if you've made any further progress. But well, yeah, update us anyway. I think whether you have made progress or not. I think. Yes,
indeed. Thank you. That's very helpful.
Thank you. If I could ask Mrs. Hannon, please, to if she could go through the action points for today, please.
Yeah, so I captured several action points. The first one is that the applicant is to issue a clarification on the transport assessment baseline data chapter. The second one is between the applicant and Transport for London to have a look into whether they can secure something outside the DCO, within the DCO, in regards to providing more assurance on the intergreen signalling at Brook Street. The third action point is an outline traffic management plan to be submitted into the examination. And the next one would be to the applicant to clarify anticipated timescales subjected to being approved to when they could incorporate, or if they can, a safe cycle and walkway routes. Next, that the applicant, the next one was about the plans, so I'll leave that because that's been discussed for tomorrow morning. And then also the applicant is already timetabled, but I just made note that they were going to submit a statement of common ground between London Borough of Havering and themselves regarding the historic matters on agenda item 3.2. And then the applicant to look into providing the works in the document and what documentation that they can consider to doing some trenching regarding the historic environment impact after their meeting with Glass. And I'll make sure that they have the right deadline dates for when we publish the actions later on this evening or tomorrow morning.
Thank you, Mrs. Hannon. Mr. Chalice, anything you want to add before I adjourn the meeting?
Thank you. So no, we think that captures everything. That's really very helpful indeed. Thank you.
And no doubt there may be more action points first thing in the morning when we deal with the updates that we're asking for. So with that, it's just to thank you all for today's participation. If you're not joining us tomorrow, we hope you've gained and you've heard the matter that you wanted to hear and satisfied that the issue has been debated. And again, we thank you for your participation. So we will resume this hearing tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, where we will discuss design and landscaping, people and communities, and any matters for clarification as set out on the agenda. Reminding you that there is you will have to attend the arrangements conference, and that will commence at 9:30. So with that in mind, okay, so I'm just reading a comment there. I'll deal with that in a minute. So with that in mind, it is now 25 to 4, and we will. This hearing is now adjourned. Thank you.